Hi everyone, I'm Mark Harrison and this is a history of Rome. Last time we heard how spiralling debt within the lower orders and exploitation through usury had led to clashes with the ruling class. We heard how these clashes manifested in demands that the Senate provide some sort of debt relief, and how the people had refused to give military service to the state until their grievances had been dealt with. To placate the people, we heard how the Senate, through the consuls, had on more than one occasion promised to give the people what they asked for in return for taking the military oath, only to renege on that promise once the danger was past, and how the plebeians had finally had enough of senatorial assurances, thus creating a complete impasse. Let's continue. As 495 BC passed into 494 BC, the dispute between the orders showed little sign of resolution. In fact, it was safe to say that positions had become entrenched. Word even reached the Senate that the people were now holding regular nightly gatherings upon the Esquiline and Aventine hills. The new consuls for that year, Aulus Viginius Tucostus Calimantanus and Titus Veturius Geminus Cucurinus, brought the matter of these meetings to a concerned Senate. The senators, feeling disgruntled that the consuls hadn't dealt with the matter themselves by now, nevertheless decreed that there should be a new enlistment into the army, whereupon the people would be constrained by their military oath. To undertake the Senate's wish, the consuls now addressed their fellow Romans and relayed the decision to raise new levies. By name they called the citizens to come forward to take the oath, but to a man they refused. The crowd now informed the consuls that there would be no response to the levies until their concerns had been dealt with and until their rights and liberties had been fully restored. Lacking any credible response to the situation, the consuls left to brief their colleagues on the events. The Senate had little sympathy for the consuls. Branding them as weak, they demanded that they step down. The consuls hit back by berating the senators on their lack of understanding as to how serious the situation had become. They refused to resign, demanding instead that their accusers come to see for themselves how dire things now were. Many senators acquiesced at this point and went with the consuls. Once more in front of the people, and now with the backing of many of their colleagues, the consuls called out a single name for enlistment. The name had been deliberately chosen as it was that of a known ringleader. Predictably, there was no response, at which the consuls sent in the lictors to arrest the man. The crowd now closed ranks, preventing the lictors from doing their job. Even though some of the senators themselves decided to enter the fray to assist the lictors, the people steadfastly refused to give ground. Acknowledging that they had failed again, consuls and senators retired to the Senate House to resume the debate and to formulate a new strategy. There was now a call for a criminal inquiry by those senators who had stepped forward in aid of the lictors. But instead of getting one, they found themselves on the receiving end of a consular admonishment for being just as unruly as the mob. Under a febrile atmosphere, the debate moved to and fro and finally boiled down to three choices. The first was proposed by the hawkish consul of the previous year, Appius Claudius Sabinus Regalensis. He stated that the boldness of the people was as a direct result of their right of appeal, and that if this right was taken away, then the situation would once more be brought under control. He added that the simplest legal method of doing this would be to appoint a dictator against whom there was no right of appeal. A more conciliatory note was struck by Titus Latius, who had been consul for a second time in 498 BC. He proposed that measures should be adopted that would address the concerns of the people and would offer some kind of debt relief. A third suggestion by Publius Viginius was to accept the idea of debt relief, but only to offer it to those who had served in the army in the recent wars against the Sabines and the Aurunci. The debate dragged on, and with no other credible suggestions, it was finally put to the vote. The option chosen by the Senate was to follow the advice of Appius and appoint a dictator. The man they chose was Manlius Valerius Maximus, the brother of the popular Publius Valerius Publicola. Now, the appointment of the dictator coincided with an increasing threat to Rome's borders from the Sabines, the Volsci and the Equi. Valerius used this threat to appeal to the people's sense of self-preservation. He also issued an edict which was similar to that which Servilius had issued the previous year. It was a breakthrough moment. The Roman people finally relented and agreed to the enlistment. Indeed, so enthused were they now that Rome was able to field an army greater in number than any other up to that time. To deal with this multiple threat, the army was split into three. Dictator Valerius took nearly half of the force and moved against the Sabines and defeated them. Half of those that were left were commanded by Consul Verginius, who led them to victory over the Volsci, capturing the lands of Velitri in the process. The remaining men were sent under Consul Veturius to aid the Latins, whose lands had been invaded from the east by the Equi. It was the Romans' first recorded clash with these people, and it proved to be a relatively easy victory for them. As Rome's force approached, the Equi, realising that they could not win a pitched battle in open ground, fled to the nearby mountains to hold a more defensible area. Veturius was cautious and looked to wait out the defenders. His troops, however, were impatient, wishing to return to Rome and to finally sort out the ongoing debt issue. They pressed their commander to attack. Veturius knew that there was no holding them back, and so reluctantly agreed to an attack. When it came, it was so ferocious that the Equi could not hold. Very quickly they fled east, leaving behind their camp, which yielded great plunder for the Roman soldiers. Triumphant, the army returned to the city. The dictator Appius now demanded of the Senate that the problems with the plebeians be dealt with once and for all. But again, the senators prevaricated, possibly hoping that the whole affair would eventually come to a natural end if they just waited long enough. Appius, appalled by their head-in-the-sand attitude, stated that he would not remain as dictator if the Senate refused to act, and subsequently resigned the office. Now, despite their desire to avoid confrontation, the senators were still afraid of the people, and so, in order to keep them under control, they simply refused to disband the army, hoping that the military oath would be enough to keep the malcontents in line. The Senate further hoped to strengthen this position when he ordered the men to encamp outside the city on the pretext that there was a strong possibility of renewed hostilities with the Equi. The people, however, were not buying this and were now thoroughly incensed. It was clear to them that they were being betrayed once again by the patrician class. Having reached the limit of their tolerance, they now took steps to assure it would be the last time that they would be double-crossed in this manner. A single man led the way, Lucius Sicinius Velutus, who suggested that the people should simply throw down their arms and leave the city and let the Senate defend itself. He proposed that they move to Mons Sacer, the sacred mountain, which is around 3 miles away at the other side of the river Anio. The people readily agreed, and so the plebeians seceded from Rome en masse, set up a fortified camp at Mons Sacer, and simply waited. It was the leverage that they had been looking for. Before long, a fearful Senate came to negotiate. The man that they sent as an envoy was a former consul, Agrippa Menenius Lenatus. To make his case, Menenius used the analogy of a human body that required all the individual parts working together for that body to function properly as a whole, and that Rome likewise could not function without the patricians and the plebeians acting in unison. He asked them to reconsider and to return to their homes within the city. Having now seemingly got the Senate to listen, the people sent 3 of their number to represent them in negotiations. They were Marcus Decius, Spurius Archelaus, and Lucius Junius Brutus. In the end, the negotiations led to far more than a simple law to ease the burden of debtors. What was agreed upon for the plebeians for the first time was to have formal representation within the law-making body of the state, to have a say within the Senate itself. It was agreed that a new magistracy would be created, the the Tribune of the Plebs. This position of Tribune would be open only to plebeians, patricians being barred from the office. Those that held the position would work in the interests of the ordinary people, acting as a buffer against patrician abuse. To do this, they were given the power of veto over anything that they believed acted against the well-being of Rome's ordinary rank and file. And whilst in office, the tribune's person was to be regarded as sacrosanct. Anybody who broke this law would be subject to punishment by death. Initially, 5 tribunes were chosen, later increased to 10. One of them was Lucius Junius Brutus, who had been part of the delegation that had successfully negotiated the concession. Another was Lucius Sicinius Volutus, who had been the first to suggest the secession. What had been achieved here by the lower classes was nothing short of monumental. What had begun as a simple cry for debt relief had grown into a wider struggle between a patrician class that was unwilling to relinquish its complete power over the state and a majority underclass who realised that its power lay in its numbers and its ability to work as a coherent whole. The position of tribune was to become far more important than those who oversaw its creation perhaps knew. Throughout the life of the Republic, the tribunate of the plebs would become a vehicle for some of the most significant political encounters that Rome would ever witness. As for the struggle for power between the patricians and the plebeians, this was only the start of a longer fight known as the conflict of the orders. Rome's political landscape had altered again, moving this young, vibrant city-state down a very different path to one which it might otherwise have gone. If you like our work, please help by subscribing, pressing the bell button and commenting. And we'll see you next time on A History of Rome.